I'm Andy Crouch, inviting you to download and listen to the new Beer Edge podcast, a source for news, information, and insight regarding the brewing industry and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The show, co-hosted by John Hall and I, talks with key players on the front lines of the beer business to give you insights and advice on how to navigate these uncharted waters. The Beer Edge podcast is available on all major platforms, or you can visit us at beeredge.com/podcasts. Thanks for your support.
This is Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and today my guest is author and writer Pete Brown, who is zooming in from London. Hello, Pete. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right, and I'm going to get to a more proper introduction in just a moment, but first I'm happy to tell you all that this episode is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com for articles, podcasts, and to subscribe to the newsletter written by myself and Andy Crouch. Also be sure to follow Beer Edge on social media at The Beer Edge. All right, that's out of the way. Pete Brown is here today, obviously, and if you are interested in the subject of beer, it's likely that you've already heard his name and read his words. He's the author of 9 books, not only on beer, but cider and food as well. And his prose, Effortlessly, brings readers along on journeys, whether it's walking through orchards, sitting at the pub, or traversing oceans with IPA. His latest book, written and published during this COVID-19 lockdown, has just been released. We'll talk about that in a moment. Pete, thanks for being here, and good afternoon to you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Nice to virtually see you again.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
First off, on behalf of all writers, I just want to express my displeasure with you.
What's that for?
Well, writing and publishing a book in just 3 months, most of us take at least double that and oftentimes longer just for the writing. Your work ethic is making us look bad, so please don't do this again.
I think I might have started something dreadful. The thing is, it's the self-publishing side of it. So both me and my wife found ourselves on the day of lockdown with no work, no income, no diary. We're both shielding because of underlying health conditions. So we realised that we weren't going out. Yesterday was the 4-month anniversary of me last leaving the house.
Wow.
So we realised we had to do something, and it's and when I was actually in quarantine for two weeks. I was travelling before that week that we started locking down, and I was with various people who contracted full-blown COVID, and Liz's lungs simply would not do very well if she got it. So I was confined to my study for 2 weeks, getting 3 meals a day brought to my door, which was really awesome, and got a beer fridge and a kettle in the study, and that was kind of cool in a way. But when I got out of my quarantine, I had this timing plan with Liz where I said, look, how about we do this, and you are the minor producer, picture research, you know. And so it was very much a joint project between us, and she's been on such a big learning curve about self-publishing that we're now kind of seriously looking at, why don't we do this again? Why don't we commission other writers? So we may have accidentally launched our own publishing arm.
So the new book is called Craft and Argument, and I want to dive into all of this in just a minute, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. You were talking about your own quarantine and lockdown. We're recording this very close to the air date of the show, so I wonder if you can sort of share how things are in London right now with respects to COVID, and how you see how it's impacting the brewing industry in your country, and maybe any lessons or observations you all have learned after your pubs reopened, I think on July 4th, right?
That was right, yeah. It's been a up and down, you know. I mean, if you ask me this question again in a week's time, it'll probably be completely different, as it would have been a week ago. We have a sense of our government really not knowing what they're doing. It's just really bizarre, and our only comfort.
We can relate.
Yes. When we're talking about this, every conversation about it ends with, "Well, at least we're not the United States." But if you weren't there to make us feel better about ourselves, we would be panicking. Well, we are. I mean,
happy to help.
Yeah, so the government have just announced that in 2 weeks' time, mandatory masks. Masks will be mandatory in public. Sorry about that. In 2 weeks' time, masks are going to be mandatory in shops. On Sunday, a government minister said that definitely wasn't going to happen. Yesterday, it definitely was going to happen. And it's just kind of weird advice all the time. And, we've got a death rate currently that's higher than the rest of Europe combined. So it's not going so well. The industry, I did some analysis on this last week. We've got a lot of misinformation here. There's a lot of stories in the press about how we're drinking ourselves to death.
Yeah.
And stories are only based on off sales. They don't take into account the fact that the on-trade disappeared for 2.5 months.
Sure.
And then on the day that pubs reopened, there was a lot of nasty sensationalist press talking about people flouting social distancing regulations, about how these stupid, i.e. Reed working class oafs were going to cause a second spike and things like this. In reality, pubs are down about between 30 and 50% on their normal business for this time of year. And we also only about half of pubs have reopened yet, even with 1 metre social distancing. For about 25% of pubs, it's simply not viable for them to reopen. So it's really hitting small businesses really hard. And I broke the figures down, and all beer is down, everyone's hurting. But lager is down by about half as much as ale. And I did some crunching of the numbers. Before lockdown, ale was 18% of all the beer that we drink in the UK. Okay. And it's responsible for 48% of the drop in beer since a year ago. So
that's amazing.
Ale has taken the brunt of it because ale skews 70% towards pubs, lager skews about 55% towards take-home. So everybody's buying from supermarkets with the pubs being closed. Supermarkets go big beer, mainstream lager. Small pubs can't reopen. Small pubs favour craft beer and ale brewers. So the lockdown has affected small brewers and independent brewers far, far worse than it has big brewers. It's really grim.
We've talked in the past, and there's obviously been reports of the British pub culture, even before COVID, being in a tough spot. Things were on the decline. Sort of this national identity of the pub was not what it used to be. How do you see it? How do you see the pub industry coming out of COVID, whenever that may be?
Yeah, on a daily basis, we face a choice of going glass half empty or glass half full.
Sure.
On questions like this. You can create a compelling case of doom and gloom, and at the same time you can create a compelling case that things are going to bounce back pretty well. I think the significant indicator for me is that the week running up to July 4th. My phone was off the hook. I think I did about 4 radio appearances. I was across the BBC. I was on late night talk radio. Everybody wanted a perspective on pubs reopening, and everybody wanted to talk about the unique role that the pub plays in British social life. Yeah. So it's definitely reminded us. Given that, if you look at the way COVID is designed, it's like it was designed to destroy the pub in particular. Social distancing, we can't buy rounds, we can't stand at the bar, we can't toast with glasses, we can't hug our mates. It targets every single aspect of what makes the pub special. And people have really, really missed it, and they're really keenly aware of how special pubs were. So yes, people are nervous about going back, but at the same time, it's become a symbol of the kind of reawakening after COVID, really.
Well, I want to transition to the book then, because it's so interesting that you're saying that the pubs, do favor craft these days, more than some of the industrial lagers as well. What is the argument for craft?
So my argument in the book, I think probably anyone listening to this show is aware of the definitional...
Nobody listens to the show, by the way, but yeah, that's very kind of you.
I think everyone's aware of the definitional arguments around craft, and it's something which I find incredibly frustrating. And I think one of the impetuses to write the book was that the Brewers Association in the States, as well as their equivalent CBA here in the UK, and the Independent Brewers Association in Australia, everyone seems to be retreating from the word craft, because it's not ownable, it's not definable, it's been appropriated to some extent by big brewers. And the small independent brewers of the world are kind of realigning themselves around the word independent instead of craft, because that's easy to own. It's easy to kind of define and to see in black and white terms. Does this meet our criteria for independent or not? And so that you could sense the idea that this means, well, craft is undefinable. It's been abused. It's been appropriated. So I guess craft is just going to go the way that microbrewery did 10 years ago.
Exactly, yeah.
And my argument is that for all its problems, the word craft and the phrase craft beer is still worth saving and using in a slightly different, slightly reconfigured way compared to how people like the Brewers Association have used it in the past. And I guess my key soundbite is that if Youngling Light is a craft beer and Goose Island Bourbon County Stout is not a craft beer, then something's gone badly wrong there with the conversation. And there's a sense that you could kind of reconfigure craft beer, because Goose Island Bourbon County Stout is obviously a craft beer in any sane discussion of the term. It just happens to be owned by the big evil empire.
Yeah.
And so what I did was go back to craft as a much broader concept and tracing it back to the arts and crafts movement, how it's evolved over the last 150 years, and then bring it back to beer. And then look at craft beer from within the context of craft as a broader movement. And it just brings you back into it from a completely different angle, and one would argue, I would argue is a more useful angle.
What's interesting, and that I found interesting in the book, is when talking about arts and crafts, you also brought money into the equation, and that funding is important. And that sort of, I think, in the romantic notion and narrative of craft, for a long time, you had brewers who were saying, "Oh, it's not about the money. I just want to make beer. This is about passion. It's not about the money." But money's important.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be there at some point, and it does force you to come up. It does force you to come up against some uncomfortable truths. So I had this kind of awkwardness. So the arts and crafts movement was about giving dignity back to work, and allowing craftspeople to do fully joined up jobs, to have some ownership over the fruits of their labours, to do work that was meaningful rather than kind of production line led. And if you're going to do that, it costs more money. So the only people who can afford to buy the products are rich people. And craft beer is a luxury purchase. Craft beer costs a lot more than mainstream beer. And the people making it, you got to make a living. You got to have a job. And so I've argued that craft is mainly a product of the most affluent societies in the world, and it shouldn't have to apologise for that. We might not like Bud, but Bud is a well-made, consistent beer that will satisfy. If you want a cold beer at a game, it satisfies that need. If you then want to trade up and pay more for something that is smaller, artisanal, handmade, whatever, then that is almost like a political act, really. But yeah, it's got to be. Craftspeople have always had affluent patrons.
There was this fun early on, as microbrew, especially here in the state, gave way to people talking about craft. There's this fun narrative, and you could sort of almost picture what it was. You just mentioned artisanal and handmade as well, and it sort of brought that to the forefront. And then I think as the industry grew, it very quickly got away from people. Who do you think lost their way first? Was it the drinkers or was it the brewers?
I guess the brewers. Craft is a multifaceted idea, and and we have this desire for simple, neat categorizations and things. And early on in the book, I run through all the different aspects that used to be in a definition of craft beer, like handmade, using traditional ingredients, things like this. And if these are all desirable elements. They're all things that, like I said, give meaning to the maker. You know, a craftsperson gets more out of being physically embodied in their work, being able to have some measure of control in it from mashing in all the way through to packaging, rather than just sitting there and pushing a button or whatever.
Right.
As they're all nice things to have, and they're also the reasons why consumers enjoy they're the reasons that consumers enjoy buying into. But if you start to make each element of that a mandatory, so if it doesn't have this, then it's not craft beer. Then you all sorts of different hiccups in the way and obstacles in the way. So if a brewer is successful and they grow, if a brewer makes an experimental beer, if a brewer starts exporting some beer, then they no longer count as craft brewers. So all these different appealing elements of the definition got shorn away one by one, until we end up talking about independence. And you read broader in the broader thing of craft, and independence of ownership is never even mentioned in any discussion of craft apart from in beer.
Let's track this back just a little bit. You talk about Vince Catone in the book, who is largely credited with bringing craft into the beer lexicon. Can you tell his story?
Yeah, I mean, so this was. I do think it's a great story. So late 70s, early 80s, there's this movement of small brewers, and they were being referred to in the press as microbrewers. And this is the thing that takes you back to a few decades. The industry didn't like the term microbrewers because not because it was saying that they were tiny or anything, but because it sounded like microchip and microcomputer, which is what we were calling personal computers back then. So you got this kind of folksy, rural, imagery-laden thing, and you say microbrewers, and people think of modern technology and the future and robots and the things. And so Catone's intention was to come up with a term that was accurate, that fairly described these small brewers, not in reference to size, but of course size was the first element of his definition that he put in there. And then he talked about natural ingredients. He talked about handmade, handcrafted, being involved in the process, all of which were good things. Didn't mention independence of ownership at all. That just wasn't relevant at the start of the craft movement. So I've kind of been a bit mean to him in the book, because his definition is so good. It's very clear. It lists all these different points that he says, I believe that this is what makes a craft brewer. And because it's so clear, I've used it to pick apart the arguments over the definition of craft, which looks like I'm sort of taking a chapter to destroy this couple of sentences that he wrote.
His legacy,
35 years ago. But only because it's a useful framework. I think he did a very good thing. You know, he was up in the Northwest, and he was trying to articulate what was special about all these brewers that he was encountering, and trying to describe a movement. And, you know, when you do something like that, I've witnessed the same thing in the music industry as well. You come up with a term, you write an essay, you come up with a term, and you think, yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. That kind of conveys what, as a writer, I was trying to get across. And then as years go by, you can't conceive of how much baggage is going to become attached to that term, and how laborious it's going to get. And I'm sure there must have been time regretted ever writing it.
Mm. So the term takes off in the US as Britain's micro scene, craft scene, artisanal, handcrafted, whatever, started to take off, which was a few years behind the US. Did the brewers there who were drawing some inspiration from what was happening in the US, did the term just sort of jump the pond, or?
Absolutely, yeah. I think around 2008, 2009, it started becoming that's. I've gone back over my blog, and that's when I started using it in relation to British breweries. Brewdog, as the biggest kind of game changer in the UK brewing scene,
Sure,
were very enthusiastic about using it as a term.
And they had modeled so much of their look and everything off of Stone, which was using that term. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was really useful for them because, you know, the key difference between our two countries is that when you had craft beer spring to life, that was against a backdrop of there being of America being a beer desert, of there being nothing, next to nothing that was any good there. The UK already had the cask ale movement. It already had Camera. It already had this old traditional craft brewing movement. I argue in the book that it's every American speak to regards British cask ale to be the epitome of craft beer. People in Britain think it's old, boring, and fuddy-duddy, and craft beer is something exciting and from America. So we have our traditional craft beer movement, but we don't call it craft beer. And Brewdog used the term craft beer to differentiate themselves not only from mainstream commercial lager, but also from this slightly old-fashioned, slightly inward-looking world of traditional British ale. And so I guess what we did then was we tried to appropriate the American definition, which,
Right.
you know, all the problems that you've had over there with trying to define it, we're just tenfold over here. They just don't work at all. Any brewer who brews less than 6 million barrels, there isn't a brewer in the UK who's that big.
So how did the UK then work to sort of make it its own and fit its own definition? Because you travel the world quite a bit, and I've seen you at various spots around the globe. And when we go to new countries, everybody has their own definition, you know, and it's slightly different, and we sort of understand, you know, what it is. But the 6 million barrel is a perfect example of something that just doesn't translate from one country to the next.
No, and truth be told, attempts, but no one ever no one ever came up with a good enough definition. No one credibly tried. Brewdog tried at one point. There's a lot of attempts when you start researching it. There's a lot of attempts to define craft where people have said, "Look, here it is. I've thought about it. Here's what we think craft beer should be," and it sits on a blog somewhere and just gets ignored. Nothing ever gained traction. So by the time, you know, we're still worrying about this, still kind of arguing about it, a fairly large constituency of people saying, look, it's just a worthless phrase. It's a worthless phrase. And so this kind of shift back towards independence came as kind of a bit of a sigh of relief, certainly for the industry.
Well, what's also interesting, too, is that the Brewers Association here in the U.S. Was always quick to point out that their definition was about craft brewers, not necessarily the liquid itself, but more of the institution or the company making the product. And, you know, if you talk to Julia Hers, who was recently laid off by the Brewers Association, you know, she was quick to point out, you know, like, we don't define the beer, you know, we just define our members. So it was more about, you know, the business as opposed to, you know, I think what Vince was talking about in those early days of, you know, the actual pint itself. What's interesting also is we've seen the word craft pop up in other industries now. You know, here in the U.S., Dunkin' Donuts, the coffee chain, talks about its you know, handcrafted lattes. You know, Chapstick has, you know, their you know, handcrafted lip balm. You know, craft has sort of taken on an extra level of meaninglessness, I guess, of people just trying to promote, I don't know, I don't want to say junk, but to give consumers, I think, a false impression. So it's not just beer, but it's other products, and you've seen that around the world as well.
I was reading an essay that made exactly that point in my research for this book, and then when I was doing my bibliography, I looked at when this essay was published, and it was published in 1982. So it's always been thus. You know, there was a huge craft boom in the 1970s, and it all like across forget beer, across absolutely everything, and it's often, it happens at times when the nature of work changes, when the nature of society changes, when we feel very insecure and we just want the comfort of feeling that something is traditional, that has a great deal of continuity, that it's smaller, it's on a more human scale. And those are very, very reassuring concepts for an awful lot of people, which is why craft does get so overused and abused. And it's been happening forever. It's been happening for as long as there's been kind of commercial marketing and advertising. I find it fascinating because it's also, there's a big lot of stuff about how craft is kind of a countercultural movement. Mm-hmm. If industry is given us a way where we can all have cheap, easily affordable, consistent, reliable goods, then it's actually quite outrageous to then pay more for something that's probably got flaws and imperfections and inconsistencies. And we just kind of like that kind of, I'm not part of the machine. I'm not part of this huge industrial complex. I'm making individual decisions. And that's why people do it, because it's just it's like when Bill Hicks did this routine about marketers and advertisers, and railing against how evil they were. And so the response to that is, oh, Bill's going for the anti-marketing dollar. That's a very good dollar. And I'm afraid as long as that's the case, it's going to happen.
There's been, and in thinking about this interview and getting ready for it, I went back to when I was editor at All About Beer magazine, and for the 35th anniversary, which I guess would have been 5 years ago, we did a cover called "Craft Beer is Dead, Long Live Craft Beer."
Yeah,
and Stan Hieronymus did a great story, sort of recounting the American version of craft, and I wrote an editorial that sort of challenged craft as well. And at the time, I was saying that there's too many brewers that are using it as a shield, and using it as a blanket to sort of cover up their own flaws. When we're talking about craft, and especially in terms of beer, where does quality come in?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? If you look broadly in craft, then ideas of quality and skill are absolutely at the center of any single conversation or aspect of craft. And we assume a better quality. We expect quality. If they're doing it on a small scale using artisanal methods, then it's going to be better quality than something that's industrially produced. And it's just not true. And it's not true in craft beer, particularly to a large degree. And we've always talked about, you might not like Budweiser, but its quality is second to none. Yeah. I talk about how Carling, the biggest beer brand in the UK, has a much higher spec for its malting barley than any craft brewer does, because they can't afford inconsistency and things like that. Yeah. And when I get round to the end of the book and I'm talking about my definition of craft, or not definition, but my sort of meaning of craft, I put quality and skill absolutely at the heart of it. And I make the point that every brewing association around the world is now saying we need to give consumers a seal, an independent seal on our packaging, and encourage everyone to use it so that consumers can be reassured that this comes from an independent brewery. I've not seen any suggestion that we should be giving consumers a seal that reassures them that this beer is of acceptable quality.
Yes, 100%. And I've been saying that for years as well. Yeah,
that has to change. Any craftsman since the Middle Ages, any craftsman has to do a long apprenticeship before they can call themselves a craftsman. And I should say craftsperson, but historically it's always been a craftsman. And there are people in brewing who go on apprenticeships. There are great apprenticeship schemes. But at the same time, I could buy a 5-barrel brew kit and call myself a craft brewer, and no one could stop me from doing that. And I think quality has to go back. If craft is to endure, both as an industry and as a concept, and as an extraordinary consumer movement around the world, then it has to address the quality issue.
I want people to buy the book, so I don't want you to give away too much, because they should. Everybody who is drinking beer these days, regardless of who's making it, should be reading this book and being challenged to think. But is there a way out of this mess that we've gotten ourselves into?
I think so, and I think it's about just taking a deep breath, and it's about thinking about it in a broader sense. Again, I'm trying to measure my words now so I don't give too much away. But it's stop worrying about a technical definition that can be measured, and just think about the broader concepts. Every time there's a survey here in the UK that I've seen, and someone says, "Can you describe what a craft beer is?" and people go, "Yep." Do you drink craft beer? Yes, I do. Do you know what it is? Yes, I do. Okay, what is it? And it's like, there's not a precise technical definition, but there's a kind of cloud of meaning around various concepts. So 42% of people will say, well, it's probably small batch brewing. 50% of people will say it's probably from a local brewer. And these things are, every answer is around 40 to 50%. So they can't be definitive, but they're good enough. It's like, I might not be able to define it, but I can describe it. And that should be enough. And the issue is always, the issues come up because at the margins, we're trying to say, okay, I need to define whether beer A is a craft beer and beer B is not a craft beer. And we spend all our time looking at that. Whereas in the center, there's thousands of breweries and thousands of beers where it's beyond a doubt that they're craft beer, however we choose to define it. And I appreciate that speaking as if the BA is speaking as a trade association, then they have an important job to do about saying who is allowed and who isn't allowed in our trade association. I think there's a group of consumers who are very interested in making sure that they buy from a small independent brewery, and they should be given very clear information as to the ownership of the brewery or not. But there's also a much bigger group of people who just want to drink interesting beer, and I believe that we should be able to call that craft beer because they're into it not just for the expectations of taste, but because of all these other associations that kind of cloud around it.
With so much going on in the world right now, and obviously the U.S. is going through the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and having very difficult but very necessary conversations. Is this the sort of thing that you think beer should be thinking about right now?
I think everyone should be thinking about it. And it's, my biggest failing is that I get drawn into Twitter debates about this, especially after having a few beers. Which I wish you could. I'm waiting for the iPhone to develop a blood alcohol monitor that shuts me out of social media.
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah,
wouldn't it be fantastic? But there's a strong argument that politics should be kept out of beer, and I can appreciate why someone would make that argument. I can understand their point of view, where people might say, "Look, I come to beer to get away from all that shit. Beer is just about relaxing and not worrying about the problems of the world." And I respect that point of view, but I don't agree with it. And I think that beer is politics. Beer is people, and you can't screen these things off. And it starts with issues within the industry itself. As a writer, publishing is the same. People of color are just massively underrepresented, and you've got to ask why that is, and do something about it. I do believe that we're unconscious of our privilege a lot of the time. We're more conscious of ways in which we're all disadvantaged. I'm disadvantaged in some ways, and I'm more conscious of that than I am of the advantages that I have versus other people. And there was a tweet by Garrett Oliver a few weeks ago at the start of the whole conflagration of Black Lives Matter again. And just, you think, these huge groups of people, every single one of them has experienced prejudice at various points in their lives based on their skin color. So I'm not, I have to check my privilege because I'm not the most qualified person to talk about it, but I do basically think that we should be looking at these issues. And then my second point, which is I should have got to a lot quicker, is that within craft beer, we do have an expectation that it will be more progressive in its politics, the mainstream industry. Whether that's right or wrong, it exists. And I am impressed with the way that craft is always ahead of the mainstream in discussing difficult issues like this.
Before we go, and I'm going to give you just a minute to think about it, but I get asked by a lot of friends who travel to London, I guess when we actually could travel to London before we were banned from getting to your island. People are asking me where to go for a proper pint, and I usually go to you for that. So I'm going to ask you where visitors should go to get that quintessential pub experience when visiting your city. But while you think about that, I'm going to remind folks that this show is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com and subscribe to the newsletter, and also download the Beer Edge podcast, hosted by Andy Crouch with new episodes each week. And also check out Steal This Beer and the BYO Nano podcast, available where podcasts are found. And please don't forget to go on to Apple Podcasts, wherever you download, and leave a review of this show. If you have questions, suggestions, or guests you'd like to hear, you can email me at johnhall@beeredge.com. That's JOHNHOLL. Or reach out on Twitter at John_Hall. Nate Schweber does the music. Jeff Quinn designed the logo. And Pete Brown, where should people go for a proper pint in your city?
So if you don't want British tribute acts to American craft beer, if you're looking for the quintessential British experience, it's better to go to older traditional pubs. A lot of them are owned by big chains, but they're very well run. I did quite a few in my book, The Pub.
Yes.
I would say get out of the West End, out of Oxford Street. There aren't too many around there. They kind of see the tourists coming and do the lowest common denominator thing. But just at random, I could probably reel off 10. There's a great pub called the Star Tavern in Holborn, which is kind of legal, where all the courts are, the legal district, and it's tucked away at the back, and it's just a taste of old London. It's where lawyers come to kind of have sneaky chats over a brief or whatever. It's where people come to kind of sit and have an afternoon glass of wine. I think 3 p.m. in London is a superb time to check out old pubs like that with great cask beer. It's got to be about great cask beer. Any good Fuller's pub is a place where you're going to get a great pint of ESB or something like that.
Has that changed since they changed ownership?
A little bit. The range is changing. Asahi, who now own them, have far too many beers now in their portfolio to manage effectively. So they're going to have to get rid of some great beers in order to kind of run the business forward. Mm-hmm. But still, in fact, no, that's where I went. In fact, same name, different pub, same name, the Star Tavern. This one in
not
Belgravia.
Confusing at all. Yeah.
The Star Tavern in Belgravia is the pub that your near namesake John Hall used to visit, and it was the inspiration for him to start Goose Island all those years ago. And
a different spelling, but yes, that's fine. Yeah.
And a pint of ESB in there, I would say, is the quintessential British pub experience. I got there in the end. Okay.
Pete Brown, he's got a new book out. It's called Craft and Argument, and it's now available where fine books are sold or downloaded. Make sure you get a copy today, and you can also learn more about Pete and all of his many, many, many other books that make all of the other people who write about beer look bad at petebrown.net. Pete, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
And thank you all for listening. I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to